Hello, my name's James Heidema. I'm an international trainer and a strategic coach. And here I'm dealing with the most frustrating response we get from a customer. I want to think about it. So your customer wants to think about it. Well, I guess there's a couple things you need to think about before you offer a response. The first thing is often, I believe that when a financial advisor is dealing with a customer, often they talk too much, they share too much. And it's almost like you're blowing up a balloon. We've all blown up a balloon, and you blow it up and you blow it up and you blow it up, and it gets bigger and bigger. The more you talk about as a financial advisor, the more that you share, the more that they have to think about leads you to that response when you ask them to take action where they say, I need to think about it. Of course they need to think about it because you've probably given them too much information. Okay? The next issue you need to deal with is the gap analysis. In a former video, I've shared how to use the gap analysis and why it's important that we truly understand the customer, where they are today and where they'd like to be in the future, current situation, desired situation. We need to get them to admit there's a gap between these two and them to verbalize what the gap actually is. Because at that moment, when you do the gap analysis with them and they say to you, well, I need to do insurance, I need to do investment, I need to save, whatever it is they say they need to do to move towards their desired situation, they've began the purchasing process. They began to buy from you, okay? And now we just have to make sure that continues. Loading them up with a lot of other information, the economic model, the 6 jars, or whatever else you're doing, can overwhelm them. If they have an appetite for it, if they have a request for it, if they need greater detail, of course give it to them. But often I think what I deal with a lot of financial advisors around the world, often what they do is they share far too much information. And of course the customer is overwhelmed, and of course they say, I want to think about it. And I know when we hear that, I want to think about it, inside we're going, yes, yes. But actually what we're saying inside is, oh my God, no. What do I do now? Okay, so they want to think about it. So let me role play with you how I behave in that process. Let's imagine that I haven't shared a lot of information. I've shared enough information, that I've done the gap analysis, the customer's accepted there is a gap, and they verbalize what the gap is, and I've made my recommendation, and they say they want to think about it. And I said, well, we could do that into the role play. We could do that, but why don't we think about it together? Now, if you're doing this in a Zoom meeting and you're not doing it person to person, you ask them to get a piece of A3 paper or 8.5 by 11 paper. So you say to them, excuse me, could you get a piece of 8.5 by 11 or A3 paper? And of course, most people have that paper. And because most people have a printer. And so you say, okay, you have it in your hand, and you see they have it in their hand, or you give them one when if you're with them in the actual meeting face to face. And you say, I'd like you to imagine this is the gap. This is what we've uncovered, okay? And they say, yeah, I can see that this is the gap. This represents the gap. I say, first question, was this gap here before I arrived, before I spent time with you, or did I magically create it? Now, majority of people will say to you, well, no, it was here before. Some might say, well, you created it. And I would just smile at them and say, really? And they'd say, no, I guess it was here before. I guess I had this gap. I haven't been saving. I haven't been investing. I haven't been protecting. I said, okay, all right. So then if this represents the gap and it was here before, you have a choice. You can leave this meeting and take the gap with you, or you can leave this meeting and leave the gap with me. Doesn't it make sense to leave the gap with me? And often I find customers presented with this scenario say, well, you take the gap. Sometimes they will say, well, I can't afford the 200 euros or the $300, whatever it is. I could only afford half that at this point. And I said, okay. Then I would take the piece of paper, I would fold it in half or in thirds, whatever the percentage is. I would tear it into two pieces. And I would say to the customer, okay, I'll take care of this today, and we'll put the process in and put the plan in process, and I'll come back and deal with this in the future. Now, I've actually had people I've done this with, and I've come back to them some months later, and I'm in their home, and they'll reach in their drawer and they'll pull out this piece of paper, which they say, and I actually had one guy actually say to me, he said, you know, every time I go in that drawer, I see that piece of paper, and it reminds me that I haven't done the complete job. Please take care of this piece of paper. And what ends up happening is to take care of the whole process. Okay, so let's talk about what's happened here. You know, when we talk about investments and savings and insurance, it's a concept that sort of floats around here, because in some cases they'll never see it. You know, I've had life insurance for most of my life. Obviously I'm alive, so I've never used it. I've had critical illness and accident insurance throughout my life. Never had to use it. I've had savings investments, and I've used those throughout the years. But in the beginning, I didn't have anything. In the beginning, it took a while for it to accumulate. Of course, many things that people invest in, there's a front-end load. So if they put in 100 euros or $100, you know, in the beginning, maybe only 50 of that goes actually into the account, and the rest goes towards the expense of setting up the account and everything. And so it's a concept that floats around here, financial advice, financial products, because often people don't see them, just as I said. But soon as you say, I'd like you to imagine this is the gap, this is the problem we've uncovered, and you put it into their hands, now the problem, the gap becomes real, because they can see it, they can hear it, they can touch it, they can taste it. Now the gap is very, very real to them. It's become concrete, okay? So then you say to them, well, do you understand that this represents a gap? Yeah, I understand that. Was it here before I arrived? And most people say, yeah, it was here before. And then you say, well, doesn't it make sense that I take care of it? Because if you leave this meeting and don't take an action, that gap goes with you. Okay? All right, so there we are. That's one way you can deal with, I want to think about it. I'll give you another way you can think about it. You know, I believe in being honest and very frank with the customer. When I uncover a gap in someone's life, investments, savings, insurance, whatever it may be, I become very concerned, because I have a history of dealing with a lot of clients throughout the years, and I've had people die on me. I've had people become sick. I've had people need their money throughout their life. So I understand it's very real what we do, and it is very meaningful what we do. So let me role play with you again. Okay, let's pretend you're that client and you said, I want to think about it. And this is what I would say to you. I said, well, this has been my experience. People leave my meetings on occasion and say they're going to think about it, and they go home, and it's like you've got a pile of things to do, you know, like almost like an in basket if you're in the office and there's stacks of things you need to do. And they come home from a meeting with me, and the issue of their gap is right on the top. But as soon as they get home, life begins to overwhelm them, and other things become on top of it. And after a while, their best intention was to think about it, but they don't think about it. And when I call them back to follow up, they, rather than say they haven't thought about it, they say they have, and they don't want to make a decision, which really concerns me. So that's step number one. You say you're going to think about it. I know that life is busy for all of us, and although you have the intention to think about it, I'm not sure that you will. Okay? Next. Next is, after having said that, I would say this. I would say, there's two issues that concern me about you not taking action today. The first is around the gap. We've uncovered a gap in your plan between where you are and where you'd like to be. You've admitted there is a gap. You've told me what the gap is. I want to be very clear. If you leave this meeting, the gap doesn't disappear. The gap goes with you. Do you understand that? Okay, so you understand that. Now the second thing is far more serious and far more concerning to me as your financial advisor, is that we've uncovered some issues that put you and your family at risk, whether it's savings, investment, insurance. And if you leave this meeting and you do not take action, that risk goes with you, not only on your shoulders, but on the shoulders of your family. Doesn't it make sense for me to take the risk rather than you to take the risk? So that's how I deal with the question of, I want to think about it. Number one is, I try to get them to think about it by dealing with a piece of paper and making the concept of insurance, investments, and savings real rather than an idea that's floating around, by putting it in their hands so they can actually feel it, if you like. Next is I deal with those two issues in conversation about, the gap is there, the gap is not going to disappear, the gap still exists and it's going with you. And the far more critical thing as a financial advisor is the issue of risk. Because people do die, people do get sick, people do need money in their life, and you're the only one that can make a difference. You're the only one that offers them those choices and dignity they deserve. So next time someone says to you, they want to think about it, smile to yourself and say, well, do you have a piece of paper? Let's think about it. And then if they still say no, say, okay, let's talk about the gap and let's talk about the risk. If you do that, I promise you, many more people will buy from you. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, and share this with others. If you have questions, send them to me. There's lots of things I can share with you, so if you're wrestling with something, let me know. Take care. Bye for now.